Three, two, one.
Welcome back to the Testudo Times podcast. We're here getting ready for the Ohio State game. Pete Volk, along with Andrew Emmer. Dave Tucker's going to join us later on. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Maryland is about to play a meaningful football game against Ohio State that is not just meaningful for Maryland fans. It is a legitimately meaningful Big Ten football game.
It's meaningful for Ohio State with how their season's gone so far.
Yeah, I mean, right now you can make a case that Maryland is not as much, but right under kind of, if you take a Michigan State and Ohio State, and then maybe Wisconsin and Nebraska from the West, Maryland's right under that. I mean, they're knocking on the door of that top tier of the Big Ten in year one.
And Matt Brown of Land Grant Holy Land, our Ohio State affiliate, was making the case to me earlier today that Maryland might actually be on the same level as Nebraska and Wisconsin. I wasn't ready to make that shift yet, but people have been impressed by Maryland. Ohio State hasn't been all that impressive. This could be an interesting game. I still expect Maryland to lose. We'll talk more about that later. What are your expectations for the game?
Yeah, I mean, going back to what you said about whether Maryland can be argued to be on the level of, Wisconsin and Nebraska and, perhaps even Ohio State. As a Maryland fan, I'm not ready to say that. But if you're looking at it in a vacuum of just this season and from the outside, Maryland's one loss is probably the best loss in the Big Ten outside of Michigan's to Oregon. Would you agree with that?
Michigan State. But yeah, I would say that I think you could really make an argument for Wisconsin's to LSU as well.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that is definitely.
I do think that LSU might be the team that ends up missing a bowl game after that in that loaded SEC West division, just because there's so much talent there that, regardless, that's not what we're talking about. But I do think that LSU win is a bit more impressive. Although West Virginia, I don't know if you saw the Football Outsiders F/plus, however you want to call it, the advanced statistic that kind of rates every team. West Virginia is 21st, I think, in the country.
It makes sense to me. They've had perhaps the hardest opening schedule of anyone in the country. They've played 2 potential playoff teams, 3 if you count Maryland, which I don't, but you could.
For those that don't know, they played Alabama and Florida State. No, not Florida State, Oklahoma. And they gave them both a game.
Oh, they definitely, Maryland really, I mean, we come in as Maryland fans having all these preconceived notions about the team, about Randy Edsall, and deservedly so. But just in a vacuum, Maryland has played as good as anyone in the Big Ten has so far this year. They haven't played it, they had their 1 cupcake and 2 if you count South Florida, but I don't know how much you can count a legitimate conference team like South Florida on the road as a cupcake. I don't think anyone would consider that really a gimme game.
NC State does.
NC State does, but Wisconsin does not. They play them at home.
Yeah.
Wisconsin struggled with South Florida. So it's an exciting time to be a Maryland football fan, and that exciting time may really come crashing down in a few days. But right now, we can enjoy it.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is the last semblance of, Maryland could really do this that we're going to have for the rest of the season. Because after this Ohio State game, I think the reality for the Michigan State game and perhaps the Wisconsin game will come crashing down. But we've talked about it before. I think that the rest of the schedule is much more favorable than it was before the season started.
Right. I mean, you pointed it out on Twitter, but it's gone from Maryland has to play Michigan and Maryland has to play Penn State and Maryland has to play Iowa to Maryland gets to play Penn State and gets to play Michigan and gets to play Iowa. And of all those 3 teams, Iowa might be the best, which is really weird to say, but Penn State looked super flawed. I mean, they've looked super flawed all season. They just happen to have a pretty easy schedule. And Michigan is a tire fire, a dumpster fire. There are people on Michigan campus protesting the football team right now. I'm watching ESPN. There are people protesting the football team. It's not a good time in Ann Arbor.
Hey, Mark Turner's 1 year away from that.
I don't think anyone
I do think, though, out of that,
cares about any Maryland sport as much as these people care about Maryland football.
That Michigan football, yeah, you're right. But I do think out of that group of 3 teams, I do think that Penn State actually poses the easiest matchup for Maryland, just because Penn State beat a good Rutgers team or a pretty good Rutgers team. Rutgers has looked good
We
so
can
far
debate
this
that.
season.
We can debate how good Rutgers
Okay, I
is.
think especially offensively, I think Ralph Friedgen has installed a very nice scheme for them, and I think that Gary Nova has looked much better than anyone expected Gary Nova to look like. That being said, without their running back, Paul James, who's after the year with an injury, that hurts their offense a lot. But back to Penn State, the team that beat up on them was Northwestern, which is a team that's been established on a defensive identity. Maryland's defense is much better than its offense is right now. And I think because of the matchup problems that Penn State has, the tremendously weak offensive line that they have, the loss of the playmakers on the outside, I think that Maryland matches up really, really well with that team. Not the Ohio State game, but we're talking about how the schedule looks different. We've got a show ahead of us. We can kind of drift, can't we?
Of course we can. And I really think that we've said this a lot, in the past, but this is Maryland's year. They have to beat Penn State. I think that's a must-win game. And it's weird to say going to Penn State's a must-win game, but it's a must-win game because Penn State's just going to get better talent-wise. And it's going to happen immediately next year and in the year's future. But if Maryland can show that they can beat Penn State, even a very, very weak Penn State team, that's going to be a big deal. And it really could show. We know Penn State's going to have the talent in the coming years. But if Maryland can beat them and beat James Franklin, it might put some doubt in the minds of people who see Franklin as some sort of juggernaut in the making, and he may just be a really good recruiter. Like we don't know that he's not just a really good recruiter.
That's a good point. Penn State, when I've watched them, they have not looked impressive offensively. I know that our friends at Black Shoe Diaries have already called for the dismissal of offensive coordinator John Donovan, former Maryland assistant coach John Donovan, just because their offensive scheme is so boring, not to put it in no other terms, so Big Ten, so Iowa, so Purdue. This is Penn State football.
I work with a Penn State fan. He actually is a Penn State and Pitt fan. He went to Penn State. He grew up a Pitt fan, so he did not have a good weekend.
Man, that was a bad loss for Pitt.
That's
Akron.
Horrific.
Oh.
But I watched the opening game of the Penn State season with him, the UCF game, and I was walking with him. I said, and he was getting frustrated with the Penn State play calling the offense, and I was saying, "This is James Franklin, man. He's gonna get you players. He's gonna improve the team, but you are going to be pulling your hair out at the offense."
I think that it's entirely possible that if this continues throughout this year, Donovan will go as kind of a scapegoat for why the first year failed, and then they'll bring in someone who can actually coordinate an offense instead of someone who's been with Franklin this whole time. We'll see if that happens, and I think Franklin with a quality offensive coordinator is really dangerous, while Franklin without one is just kind of dangerous. I do think that Christian Hackenberg has been pretty much completely and totally wasted, and a large part of that is because of their inadequacies on the offensive line.
They're running a real risk if this doesn't get better quickly of really ruining Christian Hackenberg. He's a really, really talented player and has performed, has had perhaps the best first year and a half of any Penn State quarterback ever. Actually, I don't think that's a stretch. I think he probably has had the most successful first year and a half of a Penn State quarterback ever. But we've seen over the course in the NFL and in college, really good quarterbacks, really talented quarterbacks get ruined by bad offensive lines and just their confidence shaken. And
looking at you, Washington.
Looking at you, Washington. Looking at you, Houston. The Houston Texans with David Carr. Aaron Rodgers at the beginning of his career not the beginning of his career, the last few years in Green Bay. Danny O'Brien is in his second year at Maryland. Yes. Is a decent comparison. He was AC Rookie of the Year. He had a horrific offensive line. His confidence was completely shattered, and he ended up at a D2 school.
The difference being that Danny O'Brien wasn't a 5-star recruit. Christian Hackenberg was, but we'll see what goes on. Dave is joining us now. Hi, Dave. We were talking about how Penn State sucks.
That's a fantastic topic.
Yeah. Would you like to join us? Would you like to expand on that at all?
State College is in the middle of nowhere. Let's see, what else can we talk about?
We meant at football, but you're free to talk about the school, I guess, if you want.
Get my hatred just like run through all program that thinks it's been relevant but hasn't really been that relevant for a long time. I kind of feel like they're the Notre Dame of the Big Ten.
That's a very good point. Although, as much as I like bashing Penn State, and you missed a little Michigan bashing, that was fun. Some mild Rutgers bashing, just mild. We have plenty of time for that. They're the last game of the season. But as much as that has fun as that's been, Maryland played a football game this past weekend, and it was perhaps their best football game in many years. They obliterated what was we thought was a decent Indiana team at Indiana. What was it? Score 37-15.
That's what it was.
And it wasn't even that close, as silly as that sounds. Pete and Dave, I want to start with Pete. What were your impressions going into that game? What did you think was going to happen? 'Cause neither of you were on the podcast last week. Both me and Alex picked Maryland to win it, and I thought they would win comfortably by like 10, not by a million.
What's impressed me, I talked about it after the Syracuse game, and I didn't really remember. Many people pointed out the NC State game, but excluding NC State because they were horrific last year, the last time that Maryland went on the road and looked prepared from start to finish and just comfortably beat a solid team on the road. That's a really rare thing to do for any college football team, and Maryland has done it twice in a row. Dogs on the road, went there prepared, looked like they had a game plan, especially on offense. The offensive play calling of Mike Locksley was tremendous in this game, and they went out there and routed Indiana.
I want you to get back to your impressions, but I wanted to point out this. After the Syracuse game, which was a road, out-of-conference, comfortable victory, all those, whatever, four things, I went back. I have way too much time on my hands sometimes, and I went back and I looked through past Maryland's schedule to see the last time they beat an out-of-conference opponent, a Power 5 out-of-conference opponent on the road comfortably, and I went back to 1992, and I have not found one yet.
That's amazing.
But yeah, Pete, if you want to get back to your impressions or what you were thinking about the Indiana game. Did we lose Pete? Dave, why don't you take over? Anyone there?
Look good.
Hello?
I'm here.
Pete? I can edit all this stuff.
Well, we get this sorted out.
All right, we're just waiting for Pete, it looks like.
You guys can hear me?
Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
So Pete's frozen?
Yeah. And I don't really want to get started until we get him fixed because his words will start popping up into our conversations.
Right.
Let's see here. I can edit all this down once we get back up and going. I'm going to eject him.
Okay.
I can do that apparently, and I'm going to re-invite him.
What's your shirt say?
Tour guide pride
Nice.
from when I was a tour guide.
That's awesome.
It was a good shirt.
Apparently the dog wants to be on the podcast.
He can be on the podcast, or she can be on the podcast.
You be on the podcast, Tim? No, he has shaked his head. Definitively no, he's not interested. Yeah, I was completely shocked and blown away by the Indiana game.
I did not see that coming at all. They were perfect.
I wrote in my 3 things post beforehand, 3 predictions. I predicted that they would win, and then after that published Saturday morning, I saw the news that half our defense wasn't going to be playing this game, and I was like, we're going to give up 1 billion rushing yards, and this game isn't going to be close, and Indiana's going to blow us out. And then
I thought Tevin Coleman would run for 200 yards and we would win because I just didn't think that their defense was good, but they looked awesome.
They did. CJ looked great, and then Rowe came in. He looked great. Our running game was great. Our defense. We really contained him with Coleman for the whole game.
I don't know how I feel about the CJ Caleb thing because part of me thinks that Caleb's only been really, really good because of limited playing time.
Yeah.
But I really do think CJ's gotten better every game. But he's such a better thrower. He looks like he could be an absolute star next year.
I think part of it is that the ball comes out of his hands with so much more zip on it, and it just gets to everyone so much faster.
That throw to Winfrey, I don't think CJ's ever made a throw like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think Rowe can probably run more than people give him credit for.
They just don't ask him to do that ever.
He did some of it against Indy. He did some zone read stuff. But he just looks like a guy that, if you put him back there and give him time and he's got the receivers, he's going to make plays.
Next year, when the offensive line should be fairly excellent, assuming that Gray and Prince are in there, and we still have who would be the offensive line next year? It would be Gray and Prince, and maybe Don. We can't have that many freshmen. Whatever it is, with should be a pretty good offensive line. He could really have a lot more time. He could be really good next year. I don't know what happens after that, but next year might be nice.
Yeah, and we let's see who we lose on the line. We lose our
Conaboy.
That's going to be the biggest loss. So I don't know. I'm sure Pete can tell us more about who our backup center is, but that's going to be the biggest loss.
Oh, we have Brandon Moore.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of guys that just aren't playing right now.
And that's what I wrote about that. I was talking to Pete about it. I was like, the biggest thing Etzel doesn't really get credit for is that they have depth now at pretty much every position, and they hadn't really had that before. If a guy goes out, they have someone that can step in and do a pretty good job. Is he not rejoining or what?
He says it's not allowed to rejoin. That's really weird. Why wouldn't he be allowed to rejoin? Let's see. Hold on. All right, I'm just gonna start this over and we'll edit together the audio. It's pretty easy.
Okay.